Everyone hear me okay? I have been handed a note under a good promise that if we do this quickly, it won't rain. We'll see how good the note was.
He's here.
Hello and welcome to the 63rd 445th Veterans Memorial. Today, as you can see, we're here to dedicate. You can hear me. Can you hear me now? Okay. As you can see, we're here to dedicate another edition to the Veteran POWs. In addition to this is a tremendous history, not only for the city of Berlin, Germany, but more importantly for the free world. It symbolizes the loss of freedoms that so many have taken lightly. The Berlin Wall cut through the heart of Berlin at the height of the Cold War, a war that many have forgotten. Part of this war was the Berlin Airlift, an innovative solution to prevent the total choking and fall of the city that was known as West Berlin. A brief history overview is provided to our guest in the handout. I think everybody has a handout. We have them going around. Just make it known and we'll get you a handout. Young and old seasoned air crews that flew in the Berlin Airlift eventually evolved to here at Norton and introduced Norton into the jet age with the 141. Most of those air crews and maintenance personnel have transitioned on in life. Although their heart is here, their bodies just won't cooperate and allow them to be here in person. The wall will also help us educate the schools in the local area as we try to work very closely with the schools to educate them in this historic event that the Berlin Wall was put up and why it came down. Next, I'd like to introduce the person that was very instrumental in allowing the wall to be presented here at the memorial. I am sure that he will share some interesting and statistics of the wall's history, specifically about this section. It's my pleasure to introduce Councilman Henry Nickel.
Thank you, Bob. Could I just see with a show of hands how many veterans we have in the audience today? Well, first off, I would like to give a round of applause to you. Thank you. Bob had stated that somehow I was instrumental in bringing this to our city. Well, let me just say the veterans in this audience were more instrumental than I could ever be in bringing this monument to our city. And I want to thank you for helping my generation and generations yet to come to understand that we live in a world that is free because of your service. And this wall, I will hope, will serve as a memorial to your dedication and the duty of many like you to our country and to the cause of freedom, not only in this country, but around the world. Thank you. Weather permitting, it's actually kind of interesting. This weather reminds me of any number of summers I spent in the city of Berlin. I grew up here in San Bernardino on the Inland Empire. Our home was in the flight path of this Air Force base. And as a kid growing up, I remember playing out in the front yard and looking up and hearing the roar of those C-141s circling overhead and landing here. And at that time, I couldn't have appreciated exactly what that meant. And it wasn't until the summer of 1989, I was still about 10 years old, but I was old enough to realize that our world was changing, and was changing for the better. That summer was a summer I remember suddenly taking an interest in the news, taking an interest in world affairs. Things were rapidly changing over the Atlantic Ocean. Europe as we knew it was transforming from a continent divided to a continent that would soon be united. I remember this base. I remember my first glimpse of the SR-71 was here. I remember seeing the B-2 bomber when it was unveiled and was the greatest aircraft at that time, and then seeing the stealth fighter revealed. These weapons were our way of sending a signal that we were committed not only to our defense, but the defense of free people around the world. That summer, my dad, who's in the audience with me this evening, began talking about taking a trip to Europe. I suddenly got interested in politics. I got interested in what it meant to be an American and what freedom really meant. I actually brought the atlas that my dad bought me that summer, 1990, and I think this was the last world atlas that included a map of a divided Berlin. After that summer, the Berlin Wall would fall. That November, I remember being in the 5th grade, watching the news, watching the tears fall from so many people overseas who understood that freedom had finally arrived in a part of the world that for 40 years had known nothing but despair, fear, intimidation. 10 years later, I decided that I'd take a trip and go to Berlin. I ended up staying for about 3 years. It's a city that even today I think conjures up many mixed emotions. It's a city that has experienced tremendous despair and yet so much hope. It's a city that's experienced defeat and yet rose to victory. It's a city that knows destruction and rebirth. It is a city that not only demonstrates mankind's brutality toward fellow human beings, but also the collective ability of good to defeat evil. Within a few short years of the end of World War II, the very airmen committed to destroying and defeating Berlin were fighting to save it. The next 40 years would mark a monumental struggle of good versus evil. This place, this base, was born out of that struggle and remained in operation until the final days of the Cold War. I can think of no better place for this monument to be than here. The story of this is quite epic. For a number of years, I worked with a group here in San Bernardino to bring a piece of the wall to Reagan Park, a park dedicated to the memory of the president that many believe was extremely instrumental, if not essential, to bringing an end to the Cold War. After a few years, I stumbled upon the piece that now resides in Reagan Park in this section here. It was my honor to bring these pieces back to San Bernardino, And it is my hope that this piece and the other piece that resides in Reagan Park will serve as a reminder for generations yet to come of the unending and unwavering commitment of our veterans, of our armed services, to the cause of freedom. It is my honor to dedicate this display in remembrance of the countless individuals who dedicated their careers and lives to defend the cause of peace. Peace requires a readiness to serve and, if necessary, take up arms in its defense. We stand here today as the beneficiaries of a selfless continued commitment to confront oppression and aggression throughout the globe. It is also my hope that this symbol of liberty's superiority over tyranny will inspire future generations to continue defending liberty and justice for all, both at home and abroad. On behalf of the Mayor and the City Council of San Bernardino, it is my honor to present our recognition to the Norton Air Force Base Museum to commemorate this very special milestone and commitment to preserving the proud history of those who served here over more than 40 years. Thank you for your attention, and may God continue to bless our great nation. With that, I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have in regard to this section of the wall. Just very quickly, this section of the wall was located within approximately 1 mile of the Brandenburg Gate. When you proceed through the front doors here, you'll see a photo of Ronald Reagan giving his very famous speech, tear down this wall in front of that gate. On the evening of, in November of 1989, when it was announced that the gates would be opened, that the cross checkpoints would be open between East and West Berlin, a tidal wave began of people who suddenly realized that the West and the East quarters of the city were once again united. Almost immediately, people began congregating near the wall, and you can see the chip marks here. These are the chip marks that occurred during the time that that blockade, that division between East and West Berlin was finally lifted, and individuals began chipping away at this symbol of oppression as a memento, and perhaps to take out some of their own aggression towards so many years of oppressive rule. But this section was actually built in the early 1970s. There were a total of 3 generations of the wall. The first generation of the wall was built, began going up in 1962. That was actually a brick and mortar structure. Over the next decade or so, it was continually modified and reinforced. In the early 1970s, the East German government decided to reconstruct the wall using this modular design. These sections were separately poured concrete sections, rebar enforced, designed to withstand a tank. A tank can actually run into this section of the wall, and it will not fall over. So it was designed to resist any kind of onslaught by any kind of tank or other vehicle. This side of the wall here, the side you are seeing, the painted side of the wall, this was West Berlin. This was the side that was the side that was free. The other side of the wall was East Berlin. And for about 100 yards behind this section was a no man's land of raked sand, barbed wire, watchtowers, guards, dogs, machine guns, cameras, lights. Had you been on this side of the wall just a few decades ago, you would have been shot. So, again, it is my hope that future generations will be able to come and see this and hopefully learn from it, that never again can we allow brutality to dominate. Never again can we allow oppression to defeat liberty. With that, any questions you have, I'll be happy to answer them. Yes.
Those wires part of the rebar?
Yes. This section weighs about 3 tons. It's completely rebar enforced, and in fact, if you see the 2 holes at the top, those holes were made so that the sections could actually be lifted up and lowered. And the reason why you can do that is because of the rebar enforcement. The steel enforcement actually holds the whole piece together. So there's probably about as much weight in steel in this as there is concrete. Yes, sir.
This piece of the wall before, how'd you get it?
Well, this section of the wall was removed once the wall came down. The German military, the Bundeswehr, was tasked with the responsibility of taking it down. And they hired any number of contractors in and around Berlin to come in with cranes and start removing the wall. This section was one of 10 sections owned by a family. The father was a contractor in Berlin at that time, and the Bundeswehr allowed him to keep 10 sections for himself. Now, a number of people took those sections, and today you can find little pieces of the wall that you can purchase at museums in various places. Those pieces were actually sections of the wall that people kept and broke them down and now sell them as mementos. The family who owned this one actually kept all 10 sections intact, and they were in storage for well over 20 years. When the father passed away, the family decided to sell them. They went to auction in Berlin, and I ended up with the last 2 sections. Fortunately, these 2 sections didn't sell at auction. I managed to contact the owner, and we were able to purchase them and have them shipped here. Yes, sir. What's that? Well, the wall completely surrounded the western quarter of Berlin. It was approximately, I think it was almost 200, a little more than 200 miles completely around the
It wasn't all concrete.
right.
It had barbed wire on it.
Yeah, there were barbed wire sections.
I think this was about 40 miles long, wall like this.
Right. And there were any number of checkpoints throughout West Berlin where you could cross from the eastern section or sector into the west. If you're familiar with Checkpoint Charlie, there was also a Checkpoint Alpha, a Checkpoint Beta. And Checkpoint Charlie is, of course, one of the more famous checkpoints, which was the crossing within the interior of the city. And this section was also within about a mile of that checkpoint as well. So, yeah, most of the western section of Berlin was surrounded again by barbed wire, but the interior of the city had this concrete barrier. Yes, ma'am.
Do you know what the wording on the top of the wall translates?
Yeah, it's in German. It's Achtung, Sie verlassen jetzt West-Berlin, and basically that means attention, you are now leaving West Berlin. So now this was done by an artist in the days that the wall was up. This side that was facing the western quarter of the city would have had graffiti on it. It would have had perhaps painting, marking on it. You could have actually walked right up to this side of the wall during the Cold War period. However, this side of the wall was a no man's land. You would have never been able to go up to that portion of the wall.
So if you weren't allowed to approach the wall from the opposite side, how did the graffiti on the opposite side come to?
Well, once the wall came down, of course, all bets were off, and people started marking it up. Some of this graffiti was since 1989, but again, once the wall came down, a lot of the pictures you see of graffiti on the wall came actually after the wall came down, and people were actually able to go up to it and mark it and take sections out. These colors actually represent the colors of the flag of the German Republic. So it would have been West Germany, and now it is the United Germany. Now the East German flag, interesting enough, had the same color scheme. However, it had sort of a hammer and sickle insignia in the center. So the color schemes were the same, but the East German flag had a symbol of the hammer and sickle in the center.
Were there sections of the wall that were bigger than that?
Well, the first generation of the wall was a brick and mortar structure, and it was significantly larger. One of the challenges, it was built in rather quickly. They put it up rather quickly, and again, the concern of the East Germans was that it wasn't strong enough to withstand any kind of, if it had been fired on or a tank had tried to run it over, it probably would have collapsed. So the East German government began designing this section of the wall, and if you're familiar with East Germany, Chancellor Honecker, Erich Honecker, who was the last premier of the East German government, he was very instrumental in getting this section or this version of the wall designed and installed. And that's how he actually, that was one of the things he did that brought him, he rose through the ranks and became the premier of East Germany. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
How many people lost their lives trying to cross the wall?
Well, the numbers are disputed. If you go to the Checkpoint Charlie Museum in Berlin, they estimate anywhere from, could be as low as 60 people, as high as several hundred people were killed over the course of the wall's existence. Numbers are very difficult to come by because, again, the East German government didn't like to report those numbers, and so the accuracy is in question. But I've seen numbers, again, as low as, as low as about 45, clear up to over 200 people.
There's this piece of wall, then there's another one at Reagan Park, and then there's one at the Reagan Museum.
Yes.
Are there any others that are out there that you're aware of?
Yeah, there are, I'd say there are about 36 total sections of the wall worldwide. There's about 20, if I'm not mistaken, in the United States. Many were given as gifts of the German government to foundations, to presidential libraries. They're very, very difficult to come by. Again, it took about 5 years to come by this section, and it would probably be very difficult to come by any more sections. The German government typically does not release those except to foundations and as official gifts of the German government. But I think this is probably one of the only privately owned sections of the wall in existence today.
Henry just got his arm out of a sling, by the way, for me twisting it to get the wall.
And I want to thank Bob for it's been a tremendous honor to dedicate this and provide the museum with the ability to put this on display. And again, it is my hope that it will hopefully spark interest in a period of history that I think needs to be remembered, that needs to be studied, that needs to be understood. As recent events demonstrate, the world remains a very dangerous place, and we have to remain vigilant, and hopefully this will stand as a symbol for many decades to come that we have to maintain that vigilance and we have to remain committed to the cause of liberty. With that, thank you very much, and God bless you all.
Thank you, Henry. Winding this down a little bit, I think we all would agree that when President Reagan called for the wall to come down, he never imagined that San Bernardino would be the recipient of not one, but 2 sections. I think that's quite phenomenal. Next, I would like to recognize some of the folks that made this possible. On your handout, they're listed at the bottom. And of course, Councilman Nickel is number 1. The next one is JCS Welding, who have stepped up and helped us immeasurably in many different projects that we've had here at the Memorial. Thank you, Chris. The next one is Tuskegee Engineering. Now, when this first started, I drew up some plans, and I took them to the city, and they kind of laughed because I'm not an engineer. So we had to have an engineer redesign my plans, and it had to be earthquake-proof. Henry said this would withstand a tank, but Mother Nature is something else, and earthquakes are quite normal around here. Calmex Cement Company was instrumental in helping us pour the slab that we have here. Wilson Towing, where are you? There we go. I went over one Saturday and asked them to put it on their wrecker and bring it over, and they said, no problem. There it is. All-Star Crane. JCS Welding, Chris arranged for a big crane to come in and set 6,000 pounds in place without damaging the tree. Pretty phenomenal. The San Bernardino International Airport ground crew, they stepped up and helped us out tremendously. We only poked 2 holes in the system, the drainage system underneath there as we were doing the grading, and they didn't mind a bit. Sherwin-Williams Paint, they helped us out with covering the slab. And last but not least, the volunteers from the museum and the Norton Veterans Group. They stepped up and helped with all the manual labor. And I put down here for being ant bait. There's a little story that goes behind that. These bushes are just covered in ants. And as they worked and to plug in the utilities and whatnot, all of us got covered in ants. So they were very helpful in being ant bait for this. Lastly, I would like to invite everyone into the museum. We're going to begin our evening at the museum presentation. Our fire marshal here in the town has made it abundantly clear that we know how many folks that we have in the museum. So we've come up with a way to do that, give everybody an armband. And we have folks at the door that will be happy to put an armband on you and take the donation that we've asked for. And then we will begin the evening at the museum presentation with Colonel Green shortly after 7, perhaps 7:15 or so. So with that, thank you very much for attending this portion of this evening's event. Oh, wait a minute. I'm sorry. I forgot. Old age and treachery has woke up on me. I'd like to unveil. Steve and Gil are members of the board, and they're going to unveil the sign which officially designates the memorial. Please. There's also a picture of the wall as it was in place, and you'll see the graffiti that was painted on it. Thanks, guys.
This is it.
Norton Air Force Base Museum, 5th in the series, An Evening at the Museum. I'm Bob Edwards, President of the Board of Directors, and I and my fellow members welcome each of you. I would like to begin by requesting you please stand while one of our community volunteers, Mr. John Lowe, offers the invocation, and please remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance afterwards. Mr. Lowe.
Thank you, Paul. Let me pray with you. Heavenly Father, we do thank you for this opportunity to be here. We pray that it will be a blessing to our city, this activity at the museum. We thank you for the progress. I'm going to pray for the San Bernardino International Airport. We're standing in a place that we pray that you bless it for the city, for all of us. It's a wonderful opportunity to be here. Thank you for the dedication of the Berlin Wall. Thank you for the activities of the museum, of the Norton Air Force Museum. What a pleasure to be here. And personally, it's been a pleasure to be with friends I haven't seen in a long time. Bless our time together, and may you be glorified. And we're so blessed that each of us can pray as we choose. As I now pray in the name of Jesus Christ, amen. Amen.
Thank you, Mr. Garrett. Not everyone could stand up here in front of this many people as often as our next individual. I'd like to introduce Ms. Danielle Deeds, who's going to lead us in the Pledge of the United States.
Today I'm going to lead you to the Pledge of Allegiance. Place your right hand over your heart. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Danielle. Danielle's done this quite often for us. Please be seated. As mentioned, this is our 5th in the series of museum events to date. I would like to recognize my board of directors and volunteers who work very hard behind the scenes to make these events possible. Would all my volunteers and board of directors please stand? They're a terrific team. Thank you. Tonight's activities will begin with the dedication of the newest memorial outside. I think most of you were able to attend that. I hope you realize the significance of what that represents. Councilman Henry Nickel was very gracious in arranging for us to display that. Where are you, Henry? There we go. Thank you, Henry. Another example of the freedoms that we enjoy, the freedom to vote, and we sometimes get to recognize those elected that have come to events like this. So if you're an elected official, I know we have two, Henry and Councilman Charette. Would you please stand to be recognized? They're both councilmen of the city of San Bernardino.
presentation together takes the work of more than just one person. Helping the colonel in the behind-the-scenes role was yet another task of a very important individual. Each of our presenters have always had a technical advisor. It's always nice to understand that everything that the colonel is going to say is correct. May not always be right, but it's correct. The board and I would like to recognize Colonel Green's wife, Angel. Jane? Oh, you're late.
Here, Angel, these are for you, for sharing your wonderful husband with us tonight, and I hope you enjoy it.
Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce Colonel Paul Green, ex-Norton Air Force Base commander and former Tuskegee airman. He flew the Red Tails at Edley. Colonel Green, it's your turn.
You notice how low he lowers that mic low. How long can I go? You have cut me off. Angel she'll give me a signal.
I've got a book that comes out about 11 o'clock.
Angel will keep me quiet. Anyway, thank you very much for letting me come here and talk to you people. I'll probably say some things that you don't agree with, but just bear with me because I want to let you know where I came from. First of all, I want to say that I'm an American. I am not a hyphenated American. I know people are going to hyphenate me. They're going to say, he's an American so-and-so and so-and-so. It's okay if you use the first word, American. You could call me an American SOB, that's all right. And that has a good flow of words. And I think people sometimes, and quite often, they try to get a good flow of words. But just say he's an American. You know, I live in a country of unprecedented wealth. I live in a country of unprecedented opportunity. If you want to work, then you have to work. And I'll tell you, one of the things that I am impressed with more than anything else is personal responsibility. And I think that Bob, I gave Angel a package, and I'd like for you guys to read that. But I want to talk a little bit about how I got to be where I am. I was born in Springfield, Ohio in 1923. Now some of you guys are going to calculate that, and you're going to say, well, that old so-and-so up there, he's 91. But anyway, at the age of 7, I lived in a house with my mother, my grandmother, and my 5 brothers, and my father. In our house, we had only one wooden floor. All the other floors were dirt. The wooden floor was the kitchen. At the age of 7, my grandmother died, my mother died, and my oldest brother died, all within a period of about 2 months. My father, he was a gas victim during World War I, and he was unable to take care of us. So we went to a place called the Clark County Children's Home in Springfield, Ohio. And I was at the age of 7. And I had an aunt who lived in Indianapolis. And she decided that she wanted to take 2 of us out and live with her and her husband. I went to Indianapolis with her, myself, and the brother next to me. His name was Robert, but everybody called him Happy because he was always smiling. In fact, I forgot what his name was when he got to be about 14. But anyway, we were there with my aunt in Indianapolis, and her husband was on a salary of $12 a week for the four of us. And we were there for about a year, and my aunt died. So we went back, my brother and I, we went back to the Clark County Children's Home and joined our other two brothers. And incidentally, this home was integrated, and that was back in the 30s, 35. And the people who ran it were two farmers, Jim Wands and his brother Charlie Wands. And they were two big, tough, good guys, and they were just wonderful. But anyway, we were there, all the four of us, my brother Happy, my brother David, my brother Joe. And Joe, of course, when my mother died, and my father, and we went to live with my aunt. He was only 2 years old. I had an aunt who she did domestic work with a lawyer. And this lawyer, he was a pretty clever guy. His name was Smith. I guess that's a good old American name. And anyway, he found out a place called the Ohio Soldiers and Sailors Orphans Home in Xenia, Ohio. And Xenia is spelled Xenia. I don't know why they pronounce it Xenia, but that's what it is. Anyway, we went there with the lawyer. He said, well, you know, this is a pretty good place for kids. And he said, let's see if we can get these four boys into that orphan's home. Well, we had a physical, we had a mental examination, and also they wanted to see if we were in pretty good shape to go in the home, because there were 685 kids in this home, and of those 685, 40 were people of color. And you know, I'm not going to use the word black or white. I'm going to use the word color, because when I get to the end of the talk, I'll explain to you why. But anyway, we were there in the home. We went to this orphan's home. It was something I thought I'd die and go to heaven. It was a wonderful place. When you went there, you learned every trade that you could imagine. They gave you 6 weeks of that. I even had cooking and sewing, and I learned about automobile mechanics. I learned sheet metal. I learned how to work a Gutenberg press. I had woodwork, and also we had a farm. We raised all of our own food. And you know, when you have to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and go out and milk cows, that builds character. And we had to do that before we went to school. And there were many times that I had to do that, but I enjoyed that, all the great things that this home had to offer. One of the things it taught me was personal responsibility. And I can talk about that a little bit later on too. But anyway, I worked in the electric shop. And later on in life, when I was in the military, I learned, while I was in the home, of course, I learned how to send Morse code of 25 words a minute. I could also operate a power plant, a small power plant. I did that at the campground for this orphanage. But these things helped me out. I learned all that. Now, when you graduated, before I get there, they had high expectations of everybody, and the same expectations of everybody. I sat in a math class, and we had a guy, we called him Sarge. He was a World War I veteran, and he taught math. And I sat in his class, and two seats behind me was another fellow who was a person of color. And the grade cards came out, and this guy back there, he never did any work. I never voted. I'd watch him. He'd sit there, play with his paper, playing. Anyway, the grade cards came out, and he held his hand up. He said, "Hey, Sarge, I didn't get a grade." And he said, he looked at him and said, "In my class, you have to do a little bit of work to get an F." But I never forgot that. But when you left the home, you were so well educated and prepared for life that if you could go out and it cost you much less to live than a person that graduated from college, because usually at college and you have an academic degree and you may know one specific area, but I was able to do plumbing, I was able to do electric work, I could repair my own automobile, and so I had all these things that were given to me in this orphanage. Anyway, I graduated, and incidentally, there were 3 people of color in graduating in the same time. This was the first time in the history of this orphanage that people of color had graduated from high school. And so they were not familiar with what you had to do on the outside world. Because while we were there, we were almost completely integrated, except for when you became a senior. The girls went to a place called Hayes Hall, which had individual rooms. The boys went to Roosevelt Hall, where they had individual rooms. And it became a question all over the state of Ohio. What are we going to do with these guys who are seniors this year? They're going to graduate. And they said, so they decided, well, we just have to let them stay in the cottage, in the cottages. And these cottages, of course, had, I know the boys' cottage, I was at cottage 21. We had 23 boys. You had an open dormitory and so forth. Anyway, I graduated from high school, and I had a teacher named Mr. Sleep, S-C-H-L-I-E-P. He was my electronics instructor. There were 10 people in his shop that graduated at the same time. 8 of them, who were not of color, they got a job. They were able to get them a job in Dayton, Ohio, and around the state of Ohio, working for Ohio Edison. Some worked with the National Cash Register, big industry. And they got jobs, I think, the Ohio Bell, things like that. But they were unable to find a job for the 3 of us who were people of color, and the 2 of us. Anyway, Mr. Sleep, he called us in the office, and tears rolled down his eyes. He said, "I've done the best I can, and we can't get you a job." And he said, what they did, they offered you a job as a waiter in Lebanon, Ohio. He said, "Don't take that." He said, "What you need to do, you need to go to college." I said, "My goodness, how am I going to college?" When you left the home, you got $50 and a suit of clothes and little underwear to wear. And that was your worldly goods. All my worldly goods, when I left the home, was in a suitcase about, I guess it was about 12, well, maybe 15 inches long, about 8 inches deep, and about 8 inches wide. Everything I had was in there. But anyway, he said, "Why don't you try to go to college? But don't ruin your health, because I know you don't have the money, but try to work your way through college." And I said, "Oh boy." At that time, they had what they called the National Youth Administration. So I went out, and it was at Wilberforce University, right outside of Xenia. So I went out there, and I worked on drawing the plans. I had mechanical drawing in the home, so I drew mechanical drawing for the dormitory that they had, that they were going to build. And war was declared, This was in 1941. War was declared in December of 1941. And they opened up Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And this buddy of mine, we were both in this electric shop, we both applied for a job there. And we got a job. Our first pay was $1,680 a year. And I was in all, yeah, I saved money. I wasn't married then. After being there for, I guess, about a year, not quite a year, I got a raise and it went up to $1,860 a year. And of course, at that time, you could buy an automobile for $400, a new one. And you could buy a loaf of bread for $5. Yeah, 5 cents, I'm sorry, 5 cents. So things were, you just sort of figure out how things have gone up, but you just pay more money for the same thing. But anyway, I was in the battery shop. And I was walking down the hall one day, and I looked on the bulletin board, and it says the Air Corps needs pilots. And I remember Mr. Sleep said, don't pass up on the opportunity. If you see something, go for it. And try to go for it because you want to fly with the Eagles. He wasn't speaking of really, he wanted you to stay with a certain group of people who wanted to become someone. But anyway, I took the test. And I passed the physical, I passed the psychological, and the academic. And after, about a week later, I got a call, and they said, come down to the office. And they said, we don't have any place to train you as a pilot because, well, we're going to open up a place called Tuskegee. And I said, oh. And he said, they're going to try to draft you. And they try to draft you, you tell them you're on hold to become a pilot. And I said to myself, I'm not going to tell them I'm on hold. If they draft me, I'll get to see the world. I'll let them go all over every place. And so help me, about a month later, maybe less than a month, they drafted me. And I didn't say anything. Then they said, we're going to send you to California. I jumped up for joy. At that time, you know, I'd read all these stories about the 49er, and Dora Clementine, and all that kind of stuff. All the gold that was running down the streams. And I said, I'm on my way. I'm getting ready to see the world. I'm going to the greatest state in the United States and the greatest country in the world. And so I'm on my way. I spent 3 days and 3 nights on a train peeling potatoes. They call that KP. That's supposed to be, I guess, a classic name for a kitchen flunky. But anyway, we got off the airplane about, it was on the 3rd day. I got off the airplane about 5:30 in the morning. And I said, well, this must be a rest stop. And I got off, I looked around, I looked at 4 cardinal headings. I looked to the north, I didn't see anything. I looked east, didn't see anything. Looked west, didn't see anything. And looked north and south, and I didn't see anything anyplace. And I looked down, there was a bunch of sand. And I said, where are you, Sarge? Where are we? He said, you're in California, this is your home. I said, well, I never heard anything like this. I don't see anything here but sand. I don't even see a tree. And he said, he rolled out a tent, 8-man tent. I don't know if you've seen those people. Most of you young folks don't know what an 8-man tent is. But anyway, they pulled this, he threw this tent on the ground. He said, this is your home. He said, he gave us a shovel. He said, you go back there and you make your bathroom. And then he said, we're going to give you a canteen of water. And you either bathe or you drink it. And I said, boy, this doesn't sound like good California to me. But I was there for about 2 months, and I was standing, and I made corporal because in this orphanage, they also gave you military training. We had a parade every Sunday, and that taught me a lot about not only personal responsibility, but respect for authority. And that is something that I may address a little bit later on. But anyway, I was standing in line, I drilled these guys, and when you were a corporal back then, if you said something, somebody jumped. I got to be a full colonel, and I'd say something, they'd say, why? But anyway, I was drilling these troops because, I'm a short guy, and a lot of these guys are pretty tall. And if they wanted to, they'd hit me on the head and drive me in the ground like a nail. But they were very obedient, a lot of discipline. And while I was drilling these young fellows, we were all 18, 19, 20. One of the officers were not people of color. All of the officers were not people of color, but all the troops were people of color. And this is when an officer came by, and he looked at me and he said, "What's your name?" I said, "Green." He said, "Is it Paul Green?" I said, "Yes, sir." Man, I had the manners then. He said, "I want to see you in my office within the next 30 minutes. I said, "Good Lord, I just sewed my stripes on him." And this man's going to take them off. I said, "Gee, I guess I'll go in there and see what he's got to do, what I have to do." And I went in there, and the first thing he said, "Who do you know in Washington?" I said, "I don't know anybody in Washington." He said, "You're going to pilot training." I said, "Thank God." Now, I didn't say that out loud to him, but I sure said that in my brain. And they had me off of the desert, and incidentally, this is where Pat was training his troops to fight in Africa. They were training for desert warfare. I don't want to go into too much detail, but that was a pretty bad experience, that heat out there and so forth, and living with the spiders and the snakes. But anyway, they put me on a train, and they sent me to the first induction station before going to pilot training. And there were 340 people who were assigned to class 44G, which I was assigned to, same class. 31 people graduated from this school as a pilot. I went to Tuskegee, and because I didn't have a college education, they wanted everybody to have the equivalent of a college, 2 years, of college. And so what they did, they said, "We're going to give you 5 months. You come up to the standards of someone who has 2 years of college, and then you can go to pilot training." And you talk about going through the books. Angel, I was a virgin. I'll tell you, I didn't get off campus, but it was sort of a tough environment. Anyway, went through college, the college training detachment, went over, and my first assigned flight in training was in primary, and there was a fellow named Chief Anderson. He's the one who took Eleanor Roosevelt up on that flight when she went down to Tuskegee to see how the program was going. But Chief Anderson, he was a pilot who carried mail for the government by air for a while before he went down to Tuskegee. But he gave me my check ride, and all through training, especially the first phase, my primary instructor, he said, "You'll never make it. You never make it. I don't know how you're going to do it." And I went up with Chief Anderson, and I said, "Well, if I don't make it, I'm going to be a mechanic. I'll be an airplane mechanic." And anyway, I got up, and for some reason, everything went so good. I don't know what happened. Maybe that guy was riding those controls back there. But, you know, if you could make a good turn, they give you a real steep turn, 360 degrees. When you come back around, you hit your prop wash, and the airplane shakes. And that happened. And after that, I think Chief thought, well, I got this guy lost. He said, "Forced landing, cut the engine off." And I said, "Oh." And I looked out the side, and the airfield was right underneath. So I was able to make a little downwind leg, a base leg, and come in and land. There are a few stories I could tell about flying training, how I had an instructor who accused me of switching from the interphone to the radio frequency when he was chewing me out. The other instructor said, "Why don't you leave that student alone?" And he got out on the ground. Well, he was a little short guy like I am. He looked like a little baby rooster. He said, "Get out, we're going to fight right here." And the more he's talked, the deeper I got down in the cockpit. That was good. Think about getting out of the airplane. Anyway, he finally got up. I'll tell you, I won't go into other detail. We landed. And I finished the flying school, and it was pretty tough. I think I messed my microphone up.
No, you're fine.
Am I okay?
You're fine.
Thank you, sir. Okay. Angel, I'm pulling one of the bad tricks at home. And after I flew combat in Europe, flew 25 missions, and let's see, 15 were over Berlin in the 51 Mustang. And that was one of the top fighters during World War II. It was one of the best fighters that they had from the ground up to about 30,000 feet. Above 30,000 feet, they had a P-47, which had a turbo supercharger, and it could work with a P-51. And our primary mission, of course, was escorting bombers. And I remember one mission to Berlin, VO said, "We're not going to use the bombers for bait. You stay with us, and anybody comes in, you go after, but you don't go after. You don't let them think that we're not here. And then use the bombers for bait. Then you go after them. But you stick with these guys." And of course, it turned out pretty well. I flew combat 25 missions. Went back to Tuskegee. Of course, it wasn't integrated at the time. And they formed a wing, the 477th Composite Wing. And it was made up of B-25s and P-47s. That organization, it was 477, never went into combat because the war ended in Southeast Asia, in the Pacific. But it was still commanded by one of the great generals that I know, and that's V.O. Davis. Bar none. I thought he was one of the most fantastic men that I'd ever met. You know, I remember he would go out on a mission, we would go out with him, and he'd fly. We'd come back, you know, you get sweaty, your uniform, a little sweat, and a little bit tarnished and so forth. And you know, that guy get out of his airplane, he looked like he'd been in his office all day long. he had those creases in his shirt. He didn't even look like he was wearing his shirt. I wanted to go up and check his airplane to see if he had an office in there. But he was very, very strict. And he brought, I think, some discipline that nobody else could bring. And I just admire the man. And I think that is why the Tuskegee Airmen became a famous organization. I flew combat in Vietnam, the C-130, and the last airplane I flew was the C-141. I had about 100 some missions in Vietnam in the C-130 combat airlift. I left the service in, well, let me not tell you how I left the service. They were reducing, just like they are now. They had a reduction in force. The most expendable person when you're at peacetime is a pilot. They don't need about 100, 200, 300,000 pilots because they're not flying combat. Plus, they're not losing any either. So they don't need that many hanging around. So the word came down from Washington, said you have to reduction in force. Get some of your pilots out of service. So they came around and started asking people, can you get a job if you're not in the service? And you know, I was a little bit too cocky, and I said, sure, I'll get a job. This morning, I was out of service. But then the Korean War came about, and they called me back in, and I decided this is what I wanted to do for the rest of my life, to be a member of the armed services. You know, I'm just about, there may be some questions, but I want to talk just a little bit about some of the things that are going on. Personal responsibility. You know, we have the greatest document ever written to govern people. But there's not one word in that document that tells you what people are responsible for. Not one word. The only other thing I know that's documented that tells you what people are responsible for is the Bible. They talk about the 10 Commandments. What you don't do, what you should do. I'm waiting really for some politician to say, hey, we got to have a bill of responsibility. Now, I bet you I'm preaching to the crowd because I know many of you here today have a bill of responsibility. You haven't written it down, but you have a bill of responsibility that you say, I have to do this in order to become that. I have to, the government provides the facility for education, but it's my responsibility to work at that education. The government, they do a lot of things for you. And the government is doing so much now that I get a little bit concerned that our working class will be a dependent class. And then, who's going to pay the taxes? Who's going to pay the taxes for people who are getting stipends? I'm talking to the crowd, preaching to the choir right now. But I just had to get that out. And then another thing is, there are consequences for everything you do. And the main thing is, when you do something, you must think about what are the consequences going to be if I do that. You have to think. Say I tell my wife to go so-and-so, what are the consequences going to be if we break up? What are we going to do after that? If I go out and I steal something, and they put me in jail, and what are the consequences going to be? It might not just be jail. It might be other things that are happening. And that's why, I don't know if Angel has given them to Bob or not, but I wrote a bill of personal responsibility. I don't think civil rights are fine, but civil rights without civil responsibility cannot succeed. And we have to remember that. Now, I don't want to preach to you guys because you're the choir, but I hope somebody will tell these young folks that civil rights is only one half of the equation. Civil responsibility is the other half. And when you get those two halves together, the world is yours. And like I say, I live in a country of unprecedented opportunity. It's an unprecedented opportunity if you say, I have a personal responsibility. And if you go home, you think, what have I done to make myself successful? And I want to thank you, Bob, for allowing me to come in here and shoot off my mouth and all these great people in this wonderful community. And may the great one above be with you guys forever. Thank you so much. Look at them obey orders. They don't obey orders.
Well, I'm bigger than you.
No, that's
Councilman Nickel has a little something for you. Henry, please.
it is a jail term, is it?
Paul,
I've heard that done.
yeah. We go back, Paul and I, I've known Paul a long time. Reading some of his bio, we have some other things in common that I'm not going to go into with some of our active duty service. But Paul and I were Rotarians together here in San Bernardino, and when I heard he was going to be out here, I wouldn't have missed this for the world. So along with my colleague Henry Nickel from the 5th Ward, I'm Fred Charette, from the councilman from the 4th Ward, and on behalf of the city of San Bernardino, we'd like to present you with this certificate and welcome you here to a night at the museum. Thank you very much. Thank you for your service, and thank you for those wonderful words that you shared with us tonight. Thank you again.
Now, here comes the fun part, Colonel.
Yeah.
Questions and answers.
Okay.
We're going to open it up to see if anybody has any questions. And if so, I'm sure you got the answers.
I'll try.
Yes, sir.
You notice about all of these places and things that you've done. How did you have time to meet Angel? And tell us a little bit about that.
He wanted to know, with all your fooling around, how did you meet Angel?
Well, you know, I was sweet 16, never been kissed. But I was raised in an orphan's home, and Angel, she went to a church downtown in Xenia. I knew her brother first, and then when we were, after I left the home, I went to that church, and I saw that cute thing down there, and I said, "Mom, look." But you know, I had never dated or anything like that. And I was too embarrassed to go down and ask for a date or anything. So I talked to her brother, and one day she had a friend named Wanda, I guess it was Angel. And her friend was also a Tuskegee Airman, but he was a mechanic. And her friend was married to this guy. And I got home maybe a month earlier than he did. So this friend asked Angel if she would go down to this place where I boarded. I lived in one place and ate another. And she said, "Angel, go down with me." She said, "Paul Green is in town, and I want to find out when my husband is coming back." So Angel and her friend came down. And I'll tell you, it was a sight to behold. And, you know, I said, I just can't pass this up. And I looked down at those two little gals, and they were the cutest things I'd ever seen in my life. And I said, I know Angel goes to church. She's not married either. And I said, I'm going to ask Angel for a date. And And you said, well, and you know, I worked on a car for about 3 weeks, tuning it up, polishing it and everything. And we went on this date. Angel went to sleep. But she couldn't explain why. She worked a 12-hour shift. And I think she was on the midnight shift that time. And this show was Anchors Away with Frank Sinatra. But that's how we got started. In fact, I asked her out the second time, and from then on, what is it now, 68 years later, here we are.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, Colonel Greenberg, you at Ronatelli. When the bomber crew landed in December of 1944, that was the first time that black and white airmen had been together. Were you there?
At where again?
Ronatelli, Italy.
Ronatelli, Italy, were you there?
Oh, yeah, so that's where I first was Ronatelli, and from there we moved to Cattolica. We were stationed, and when I flew the missions to Berlin, that's where we flew out of. In fact, the mission up there was, I think, 6 hours, and a P-51 only had about 5.5 hours. And some of our brilliant mechanics, I met a few of them here tonight, fixed up they went down, they got some wing tacks, I'm not going to tell you how they got them. But they gave us 50 gallons in each wing tack more, and we were able to go to Berlin and escort bombers all the way to Berlin and come back home. And some of the guys were landing on opposite ends of the runway at Ronatelli.
So could you tell us what that experience was like? That was the first sort of integration with blacks and whites, people of color, people of color and whites staying together. I believe they were there for almost a week because the weather was so bad. What was that experience like?
What was the experience like working with people of color, whites and the people of color, while you were there?
Working with people of color, it was segregated.
I know. What was it like working in a segregated environment?
Well, we had the people that I was with, they were the choice of the people of color because they had to go through a rigid program. You know, that program was so tough that one time a guy had finished all of flying school, and he wanted to get his uniform for graduation, and he wanted to fit right. And the clerk in the BX, well, he went in there and he said, "I don't like this," and I guess he had a few words, and you know, they washed him out of the program. But I was with some wonderful people over there. Thurston Gaines, Bill Campbell, Spanky Roberts, D.O. Davis. D.O. Davis it was sort of the cream of the crop. That's what I was emphasizing. And, you know, like when Mr. Sleep always said, get with the Eagles, you fly with the Eagles, and you're going to be successful. And I was with the Eagles.
Yes, ma'am. Here you go.
I have a good outside voice. Well, first of all, I feel honored to hear your presentation. And I'd like to ask you, give me something to take back to our young people, words of encouragement or words just to help them overcome the fear of success, of doing what they like to do in their own lives. What would you offer?
Did you understand?
No, I think you know, he has to interpret.
That's all right, we understand.
So he has to tell me what you said.
Okay, she wanted to know, do you have any words of encouragement for the young people when they approach success?
Yeah, that build personal responsibility. That is the main thing. Don't depend on somebody giving you something. If you have an opportunity, take advantage of it. And that bill of personal responsibility tells you from the beginning to the end what you should do in order to become successful. That was why I brought it here. I talked to the people up at the library, San Bernardino Library, and there was a lot of youngsters there. And I passed out that personal bill of responsibility. But like I say, I'm preaching to the choir mostly here because you guys already you haven't written it down. But I bet if you go home, you'll say, well, how did I do this? I went to this school, I did this, I did that. I wanted to be on time to work. I wanted to do something for my wife to make her happy. And I wanted my kids to be happy. I wanted my kids to have social responsibility, civil responsibility, that they're responsible to help their neighbors, but they're not responsible for taking care of their neighbors.
In the back there. Speak up now.
Carl, you got a wonderful memory. I commend you for that. We were stationed at Rhine Mine together in 1969 to 71. I was wondering if you remember. I don't know what airplanes you flew, but we were over there together, and my kids talk about your son a lot.
You and him were stationed in Rhine, Maine together in 69?
Yeah, 69 to 71.
69 to 71.
How'd you know that? Yeah.
I was over there.
He's in the very back.
We weren't in the same outfit, were we?
I don't know. What did
You
you
were
do
U
there?
safety?
Pardon?
Were you in?
No, I was with the 435th Military Airlift Wing,
Oh, that
which
was,
was responsible for all of the embassy support throughout the Middle East, Tehran, Iran.
that was Colonel Mercer's. Colonel Mercer.
Some of these countries I couldn't go into. Some of them you can't go into now. Israel, South Africa, and you know, I was in charge of maintenance for all these airplanes that came out of the United States. And if they got broke, if something happened to them, then I was responsible for making sure that the maintenance was done to get them back in service, so they would come back to the United States to their home base. The problem I had really was guys going into South Africa. They thought that was heaven. Every time they got down there, they said the airplane was broke. And I don't know what they were doing, but they were having a good time, I guess.
You remember Colonel Newton?
I'm sorry.
Paulo, will you relate some of your commands before and then during while you were at Norton?
What were some of your commands here at Norton?
Well, I started out, I was the chief of logistics, which means I was in charge of all the maintenance and supply support at Norton. And I will tell you a little thing happened. I was in charge of flight line maintenance, not in charge, but I was over the people who did flight line maintenance. And we had, Norton was having trouble getting airplanes off the ground. And I stayed up all night one night to see what was happening, because Norton did not fly missions just during the daytime. They would have a mission that went out 2 o'clock in the morning. And we had an airplane that was due to take off at 2 o'clock in the morning. And I was sitting out on the flight line, and they had trouble. And there's a flight engineer here, I think what's his name, RC. RC, are you here?
He's that way.
He's sitting in the museum.
Oh, he's in the museum. Anyway, the engineer, he said, there's something wrong with this tire. And sure enough, there was a problem with it. And what happened there, he was a little airman second class. He was out there trying to change this tire because there's a certain window that this airplane had to take off in. Otherwise, he's going to be late. and then we got gigged for that. And what happened is all the big tech sergeants and all the chiefs and masters, they were on the day shift. And this little guy, he was out there trying to change the wheel on this C-141. I think he was even afraid of Jack. But anyway, the airplane was late. The next morning, I went down to the chief guy that ran this shop, and I put the Limburger cheese on his desk. I smeared it over his desk. And he was shocked. I said, you guys are going to get on the flight line. You don't put these kids out there to do a professional job when we have a professional mission to perform. You don't put kids out there because you don't want to work at night. And I had a bad name for that, but it turned out okay.
Let's go in the back. When you served,
When you served in Alaska, what were your duties?
say again?
When he served in Alaska, as described in his biography, what did he do in Alaska?
What did you do in Alaska besides building igloos?
Well, that's a long story. I went up there, and that's where integration first started. And Angel was with me. And you know, when I got that assignment to go to Alaska, Angel cried. The guy told us, boy, don't go up there. Don't take your car. It's a bad place. And it turned out one of the best assignments I had. Also, while I was there, they wanted to set up a weather station on the geographic North Pole. The geographic North Pole is 680 miles north of the North Pole. The North Pole, magnetic North Pole, is on Ellesmere Shelf in Canada. When you get out into the Arctic Ocean, you still have a long ways to go before you get to the geographic North Pole. They wanted to set this weather station up so that airplanes that were on weather flights, could fly up to the North Pole, make a circle over the Scandinavian country, and come back down and home in on this beacon to get back to the state safely. And I was up there for about 2 months, and the temperatures went down to 78 below zero. And you know, after it gets 55 below zero, you don't make any difference how much colder it is. One of the things we forgot when we went up there on this little exposition, there were 3 of us. And again, I go back to the orphans' home. I went because I could send code. They wanted the weather sent back to Elmendorf. They also wanted somebody who would operate power plants so we could have lights and our generator to run a transmitter and receiver. But I learned all that in the orphans' home. I went up there and came back and I made regular. And you know, when you make regular, you're pretty much set. You don't have to worry about RIF, reduction in force. I said, now I'm pretty secure. Only thing I have to do is do my job and don't try to overdo what I'm supposed to be doing. But in Alaska was where I really solidified my career in the service and stayed in for 33 years.
Any other questions?
Hi, Colonel. You mentioned that the P-51 was your favorite aircraft, but I also noticed in your bio that you've flown P-40s, P-38s, P-47s. So it's a two-part question. What was your second favorite aircraft other than the P-51 fly, as far as fighters in World War II? And did you run across any German fighter aircraft during your escorts over Berlin?
Your favorite airplane was the P-51. What was your second favorite airplane?
C-130.
And then when you were flying escort in the P-51, did you engage the enemy at all?
Yes. What we did, I'll tell you one time the Germans had a jet, they called it 262. And the only thing is this jet would, once he got up to altitude, he only had 30 minutes of fuel. Once he got up to altitude, it would take him almost 15 minutes to get up to altitude to get in position to make a run. And they could only make one pass at the bombers. And I remember this one jet, he sat out there, then he decided he was going to try to make a run for us. And he started in, and there were 4 of us, 4 51s there, and we all turned toward him. And each 51 has 6 50 caliber machine guns. So that's 24 50 caliber machine guns pointing at him. And he saw that, and he broke off. And he went down, and we knew we had him then because he didn't have any fuel. He ran out of fuel. And one of the guys shot it out. I just...
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Paul, I knew you 20 years ago on the National Orange Show Board, you and Angel. And my question is, how in the world can Angel not look a day over the top? You don't want to hear his
He said he knew you 20 years ago.
Is that Bob Lawson?
Don Fitty.
Oh, isn't that something?
And he wants to know how come Angel can look so good, and what happened to you?
Well, that's why Angel keeps me going. And you know, I'm older than Angel. Angel's only 40. Next year, Angel's going to be 39.
Any other questions? Well, I have a little something else for you here.
Well, thank you, sir. You've done so much already.
Well, I just get to be the messenger here.
Yeah.
This is from State Senator Mike Morrell.
Oh, okay.
And this is
a
a certificate from his office to you, thanking you for your participation tonight.
Okay. Thank you very much. He's got an office in Redlands, I think.
And with that, I'd like to thank each of you for coming tonight, and may God bless you.